Symbols of the Egyptian zodiacs that stand for the point of spring equinox in Pisces are reproduced in this image. They are as follows. The tablet similar to the one found at the point of autumn equinox. Such tablet can be found at the point of spring equinox in both Dendera zodiacs. Four-headed animal with two heads facing either side similar to the one depicted at the point of autumn equinox. Such animal is present in the spring equinox point in the round zodiac of Dendera and Brooks zodiac. It has the body of a beetle in Brooks zodiac, and all the heads are ovine. The row of several small snakes, cobras, with their heads raised, all facing the same direction. In the round zodiac of Dendera, these snakes are placed on a stand. In the P2 zodiac from the inner chamber of Patosiris, beneath the row of snakes is a most exotic symbol that looks like a winged eye with human legs. Symmetrical snake with two heads and wings on either side. There are identical little beetles in between the wings. This symbol was also used for the autumn equinox point. Figure on a crossed-out stand. An identical symbol was used for the other, autumn, equinox point. The same zodiac contains two different equinox figures on identical crossed-out stands. Symbols that indicate the point of summer solstice in Egyptian zodiacs are represented in this image. Let us list them. The actual figure of Gemini in Egyptian zodiacs is usually a composite symbol that unites the figure of Gemini with the Sun, Venus and Mercury. Therefore, the figure of Gemini, likewise the figure of Sagittarius, can be regarded as a complex astronomical hieroglyph. The reference to Venus is the female gender of one of the Gemini figures, usually with a leonine face. Mercury is symbolized by the other Gemini figure, which is male and has a feather on its head, a symbol of Mercury. The Sun looks like a large circle over the head of the Venus figure of Gemini. Male figure with a raised arm. This figure is often, but not always, depicted standing in a boat. It may have a planetary rod in its other hand, being a symbol of the Sun, which was considered a planet in ancient astronomy. The raised arm is a very explicit symbol of summer solstice. This sign isn't used to symbolize winter solstice. Solar bird sitting on a tall pole. Also a very explicit symbol used for the summer solstice point exclusively. A variation of the previous sign. A straight pole in the middle with a broken pole on either side, the two of the latter bent and facing opposite directions. The symbol obviously expresses the concept of local maximum, straight pole, with symbols of wavering height on either side, bent poles. It was used in Egyptian zodiacs for referring to the summer solstice point, which is indeed the point of the Sun's maximal elevation above the horizon. The middle pole could be complemented by the symbol of a snake coiled around it. A fantasy animal. A winged bull, or calf, with an ovine head, which has already been mentioned in the context of winter solstice symbolism. An identical sign was used in Egyptian zodiacs for referring to the summer solstice point. If the animal has 4 heads instead of 1, the symbol in question shall refer to an equinox and not a solstice. Fantasy bird with the head of a crocodile, or a ram. Apart from the usual wings, folded, the bird has another pair of spread wings similar to those of the bull with a ram's head mentioned in the previous sign. We have only encountered this symbol in the point of summer solstice, which is the case with both zodiacs from Esna, where this bird has a crocodile's head. In Brooks' zodiac it has the head of a ram, as well as a feather and 2 little cobras with solar discs on their heads. A symmetrical snake with a head on either side of its body. A cobra with 2 heads on a forked neck. Its whole body is stretched upwards, with both heads raised. In conclusion, let us reproduce a drawn copy of the framing stripe of the Athribis zodiacs. The entire row of symbols consists of the solstice and equinox symbols primarily. The entire lower part of the framing stripe is dedicated to the summer solstice. The number of auxiliary symbols as encountered in Egyptian zodiacs is rather small as compared to the symbols of constellations and planets as well as solstices and equinoxes, which we have considered earlier. The authors have failed to decipher the meanings of certain auxiliary symbols. However, this appears to be of little importance as far as the astronomical dating of the zodiacs is concerned. Most probably, the auxiliary figures and scenes don't contain any new dating information. Certain Egyptian zodiacs contain more information than that, referring to some other astronomical events of the year they describe. For example, some Egyptian zodiacs describe the first vernal full moon. The astronomical event in question is the basis for the calculation of the Easter date, which is why such symbolism of the Egyptian zodiacs is yet another proof of the fact that their authors were Christian, although likely to practice a different kind of Christianity from the one that we're accustomed to. Some of the Egyptian zodiacs depict the first Easter full moon. According to the ecclesiastical rules that set the Easter date, this festivity was linked to the first full moon that followed the vernal equinox. It was also used for calculations of the Easter date by the ancient Judeo-Christian Church, as well as the Judean tradition. At any rate, the first vernal full moon was an important element of the ecclesiastical tradition completely unrelated to the ancient Egyptian beliefs, as the Scaligerian version of history tries to convince us. Therefore, if we are to believe this version, we should by no means encounter obvious remnants of the alien Christian tradition in Egyptian zodiacs. In particular, there should be no artwork associated with the first vernal full moon rites. Nevertheless, such artwork does exist, and it is very explicit to boot. This once again proves the theory that the ancient, or rather medieval Egypt was a Christian country. A good example is the symbol found at the bottom of the Athribis zodiacs. It is a symbolic scene whose meaning is perfectly clear. At the beginning, the first symbol of the procession from the right, we see the vernal equinox symbol that looks as a row of snakes, all facing the same direction. Next, we have a small boat holding a circle that comprises a narrow crescent. It is guarded by two human figures located on either side. We see the birth of the new moon after the day of the vernal equinox, or the birth of the moon that shall become the Easter full moon 15 days later. Finally, the whole scene is concluded by a much larger boat that carries the full moon, with no crescent inside this time. The circle contains a bird instead. As we have already mentioned, the bird is an Egyptian symbol of the sun. The entire Egyptian symbol in question is a reference to the full moon. In other words, the moon was reflecting the sunlight with the entire surface of the side visible to the Earth observer as a full circle. In other words, we see the first full moon after the vernal equinox, or the Easter full moon. The same Easter full moon is also reflected in both Athribis zodiacs as an identical circle with a bird inside, both times in Libra. Is this a random occurrence? Why did the Easter full moon end up in Libra both times? It is easy enough to realize that the Easter full moon always takes place in Libra or the immediate vicinity of this constellation. Indeed, let us consider the position of the Sun on the day of the Easter full moon. On the day of the spring equinox the Sun was in Pisces. We have seen this fact reflected in every Egyptian zodiac quite unambiguously. Furthermore, the Easter full moon takes place 15 days later than the corresponding astronomical new moon, which takes place after the day of the vernal equinox in half of the cases. Alternatively, it can be said to occur 14 days after the crescent of the new moon appears in the sky, since this only happens on the day that follows the precise astronomical new moon date. Therefore, if the equinox falls in between the full moon and the new moon, the distance between the equinox and the first new moon that follows it shall equal 1 to 15 days. The Easter full moon can only occur 15 days later. Thus, in half of the cases the Easter full moon takes place about 15 days after the equinox, and in the rest of the case this term approximates 30 days. The Sun shifts its position on the zodiac by some 15 to 30 degrees over this time, and ends up in the constellation of Aries. If the vernal full moon comes particularly late, the Sun may pass the whole constellation of Aries over the course of this time, which occupies a mere 20 degrees of the ecliptic, and wind up in Taurus. On the contrary, if the vernal full moon came very early, the Sun shall be at the cusp of Pisces and Aries. At any rate, the Sun must be in Aries or right next to this constellation on the day of the first vernal full moon. Let us now recollect that when the moon is full, it opposes the Sun as seen from the Earth. In other words, when we face the full moon, we shall have the Sun right behind us, otherwise we shall fail to see the entire sunlit half of the moon, which cannot be full by definition in this case. Therefore, the moon is on the opposite side of the zodiac from the Sun on the day of the full moon. So, if the Sun is in Aries, the moon shall be right across the zodiac, in Libra. The Easter full moon can therefore be found in Libra or close nearby. This explains why the circle in Libra can be found in the majority of Egyptian zodiacs. This is the very Easter full moon. In certain cases, the circle could also stand for the moon in the primary horoscope, but only when the horoscope moon coincided with the Easter full moon. We shall encounter this in case of the round zodiac of Dendera. As for the long zodiac of Dendera, the primary horoscope moon was full as well, but fell on a different month than the Easter full moon, which is why there are two circles in Libra. One stands for the horoscope moon, and the other, for the Easter full moon. We can apparently see a similar representation of the Easter full moon in the lesser zodiac of Esna. In this image, we see a fragment of this zodiac that contains the constellations of Pisces, Aries and Taurus. Underneath Pisces and Aries we see two figures with circles on their heads. Each of these circles contains a crescent, which is a lunar symbol. Both figures stand on transposition symbols, a flower and a boat, respectively. Therefore, neither is part of the primary horoscope. One of the figures is already familiar to us, an infant sucking on a thumb. This was a lunar symbol in Egyptian zodiacs. It has two stars over its head, apparently a symbol of the moon being 2 days of age. The matter is that the narrow crescent of the new moon can only be seen 2 days after the moon goes out of sight. Therefore, from the point of view of the ancient astronomers, the new moon was already 2 days of age when it appeared in the sky. The position of the second figure with an identical crescent over its head is different. It is standing tall and holding a scepter, a whip and a planetary rod. This is also a symbol of the moon, this time grown up and full. Also, the transposition symbol, the boat that supports the second figure, is temporal as well as spatial, given that the proper place of this moon is on the opposite side of the zodiac. It has to be said that the full moon is always found on the side of the zodiac that opposes its birthplace. The nascence of the moon always takes place in the vicinity of the Sun, and it becomes full on the other side of the zodiac. However, the Sun doesn't manage to get all that far away over the 15 days that it takes the moon to become full. It only travels the distance of half a constellation on the zodiac. Therefore, the full moon appears in the vicinity of the constellation opposite to the one where it was born. However, there are quite a few more references to the Easter full moon in the lesser zodiac of Esna. The most interesting part comes later, underneath the constellation of Taurus, after the interruption of the whole scene by a solitary planetary figure, male, without any transposition symbols under it. This must be one of the primary horoscopes planets. It is followed by a large boat, once again a transposition symbol. Over the boat we see a most remarkable scene, which is difficult to interpret in any other way but as a symbolic representation of the 7-day festivity celebrating the resurrection of Osiris, which starts when the moon is full and 15 days of age. This fits the definition of the Christian Easter to the minor detail. Let us study this amazing artwork that depicts Christian Easter in this ancient Egyptian zodiac. It consists of the following parts. Right above the boat we see a man in a coffin. He is dead. It will shortly become clear that the figure in question represents the Egyptian Osiris, or Christ before resurrection. Above the man in a coffin, we see two Egyptian eyes circumscribed by an oval. Egyptologists believe these to be the eyes of Ra, or eyes of Horus, the Egyptian symbols of the sun and the moon. Alternatively, they are called the eyes of Osiris. Most probably, the symbol represents the resurrecting Osiris, or Christ. Let us recollect that according to the ancient Egyptian tradition, Osiris had been killed and later rose from the dead. Underneath the oval we see 7 stars. This can also be regarded as a direct reference to the fact that the Easter celebrates the resurrection of Christ on the 7th day. Finally, the entire scene is topped by a symbol consisting of 15 stars arranged in a circle. This is a very obvious symbol of the full Easter moon, 15 days of age as counted from the day of vernal equinox. It is indeed closely associated with the Easter. Thus, what we see in one of the most ancient Egyptian zodiacs is an explicit representation of the 7-day festivity commemorating the resurrection of Christ, which is connected to the 15-day full moon shortly following the spring equinox. We see a very detailed description of the Christian Easter. All of the above is in excellent correspondence with the date transcribed in this zodiac, as revealed by astronomical calculations. This date is the May 6–8, 1404, and pertains to the 15th century AD, or a late medieval period. Consequently, the actual lesser zodiac of Esna was compiled even later.